Good afternoon. Welcome to today's session, which is on managing employee performance and development. I hope everyone can see the presentation that I'm sharing and can also hear me okay. I'll just check with you, Robert. Is everything looking okay at your end?
Everything's looking fine, Julian.
Beautiful. Well, as I said, good afternoon. Thanks for everyone for tuning into today's session. Today's session really is a bit of an overview of key issues around managing and developing employee performance. And so what we're looking at today is really setting up a structure for a high performing organization and really looking at the key elements of that. And the sort of things that we work with our clients being small and medium-sized businesses around that sort of thing. We'll also have a look at managing underperformance and also how to set up effective performance reviews accordingly. So I should do a bit of an introduction before we kick things off, I suppose. So my name's Julian Hackenberg. I've a decade of experience working in HR and employment relation roles, advising small and medium-sized businesses in particular. And I'm currently with MyHR and really we are an advisory service as well as a technology platform for small and medium-sized businesses. And we really look to assist with all aspects of HR in a range of industries across Australia. Robert, perhaps you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name's Rob Minkus. I'm the general manager of the business here in Australia. It's great to be able to stop working for a moment or two, get in front of our clients, and be able to explain to them this important subject. And I welcome you.
Beautiful. So just before we kick things off, just a bit of housekeeping. So today's session is recorded. Just bear that in mind in case you have any questions or anything. The recording will be available after the session on the MyHR website. But yeah, as I mentioned, any questions will be recorded and will be available afterwards. So if you've got questions, try to use only details that you're comfortable in sharing, and try to submit questions anonymously. And you can what you can do is add questions in the Q&A section or in the chat function, and we'll look to answer your questions at the end of the session accordingly. All right, so today's topics. So what we're really looking at is looking at employee performance across the board. So what we're doing really is when it comes to performance is rather than sort of just looking at one aspect or another, say looking at individual performance, is sort of looking at the entire infrastructure and framework that is in place within organizations to support a high performance environment. So I suppose the first aspect is really setting everyone up for success. And so that's setting up the new employee, so looking at sort of induction and onboarding processes, so they know what's expected of them, they know what their objectives of their role is, and they know how to be a top performer in their workplace, and aligning themselves with company culture. Setting managers up for success, so they know what to do to set expectations early and manage performance early, and really looking at sort of organizational frameworks and the benefits of organizations of doing this sort of stuff. Not always. Despite our efforts, there's always going to be a component of any organisation whereby some employees won't meet expectations, and so what we're doing in the second point here is really looking at how to respond to that. So, something's gone awry. We really need to reset expectations and give the employee a reasonable opportunity to improve in their performance, and really getting back on track. And if there's no improvement, then really looking at what are the processes and steps that we need to undertake to ensure that we're addressing that. And there's some technical aspects to that we'll talk about accordingly. Then there's the actually more important aspects, which is developing employees. And this is the sort of stuff that sometimes gets thrown into the too hard basket. It can be a bit of an administrative burden. And so looking at things like performance reviews and I think particularly in the current environment, there's a lot of businesses who we're working with who are starting to realise that there's performance reviews are more than just an administrative exercise. It's also about retaining good talent. And so really looking at how we can put in place or have conversations around, development opportunities, show appreciation to employees, provide employees with meaning attached to their work, provide challenging work. And so these are the sorts of things that that would usually come up in a performance review conversation. So those things combined, I think we're really looking at that sort of high performance culture across the board. And we talk a lot within MyHR about the SME advantage, and really looking at, small, medium-sized businesses can really be nimble and flexible and respond to things a lot better than larger corporations. So it's using those advantages, I suppose. And so, it's a lot easier for a small business, I think, to be able to provide meaning, or to respond to employee performance, underperformance, or development opportunities in a quicker time frame. So that's the sort of stuff that we'll be looking at in today's sessions. All right, so setting performance expectations early, and I think everyone would agree that this is key to really having a high performance culture. And it's, in terms of onboarding and inducting employees, it's really one of the most expensive and time-consuming processes that a company can undertake. And so what we're really wanting to do is make sure that we've got good processes in place, so that we can set performance expectations early. So not being prepared for this sort of stuff can really hamper the natural enthusiasm that employees have when coming into a new role in a new company. And so it's really sort of setting these expectations early, and really having processes in place and documenting those, so that if down the track the employees in the best position possible, whereby they can meet the expectations of the business. And look, none of this sort of stuff is I suppose, revolutionary by any means. Some of it's a bit of a reminder, but again, it's sort of going to that sort of I suppose that discussion around the SME advantage, and there are advantages to being a small and medium-sized business, but there are some disadvantages as well, and it's around that infrastructure and that structure around having this sort of stuff, because the larger corporations would have an HR department who would sort of manage a lot of this stuff. So if we run through, recruitment process really is the first opportunity to set expectations, and even before we're recruiting, how performance will be measured, and benchmarking of salaries are sorts of things we're planning for. But even in conversations with hires, it's a really good opportunity to set expectations around company culture, around the sorts of measurements for success that would be within a particular role. Job descriptions, pretty, I think, underutilized in a number of respects, but they provide a really good summary of duties. We don't want to be too restrictive, and we want to be able to adapt to change, but certainly they provide a really good clarity for both parties, the employer and the employee, around tasks and duties and responsibilities. Inductions and onboarding, really, making the employee welcome, culture fit and systems and teams, and really sort of planning out their probation period and induction. And so on probation, really wanting to look at effectively utilizing that. One, from the employer's standpoint, assess the employee's suitability for a role. Two, from the employee's standpoint, I think there's an appreciation that their work performance will be under review. So we're just wanting to set some clear expectations and benchmarks around what's expected during that time frame, and certainly we'll sort of discuss the sort of legal implications around probation periods and that sort of thing. Check-in conversations, really wanting to set the scene early around setting up regular catch-ups, creating the habit of coaching, both from the manager's standpoint in terms of providing feedback, but also the expectation on the employee early on around what sort of things they can expect. There's a tendency around that sort of probation period to sort of just wait and see and whether there's an improvement. But really, we want to be proactive, and that's what the onboarding and the probation periods are all about, is proactively managing these things and really sort of setting the scene early. And of course, we try to make it easy with our sort of software platform and advisory service for all of our clients, of course. But Robert, I might hand it over to you. I mean, how important do you think it is to embed these sorts of expectations early in the employment relationship?
Yeah, well, I think like any process, you need to get the thing right at the front end, at the start, and that's the key to getting the most out of your employment relationship. So that's going to mean when you're advertising the position and interviewing and screening the job applicant, that's really where it all starts. So from the moment you advertise the role, the advertisement absolutely needs to match the reality of the job. So your detail there needs to be right, and then from that, when you're interviewing your prospective employees, the critical focus is on the real requirements of the job. And you need to be satisfied when you're asking questions of the applicant that they can answer that question and they can demonstrate an understanding. And hopefully, they should be able to also have examples of delivering success in the essentials of the role. Reference checking, same thing. Your reference checking really needs to drill down into what is the essential requirements of the role. And of course, with MyHR Recruit Plus, we're able to help our clients out with these requirements to help them get that right.
Awesome. And what about job descriptions? I mean, do you think they're important, and how can employers effectively use them?
Yeah, well, I think that's probably the key to it. So that's the moment when that job description is written. That's the moment the business actually has stopped and thought and captured the purpose of the role and the specific requirements of the role. Now, that position description should be the document that forms the basis of recruitment and helps that recruiter. And it establishes the relevant parameters for the search and the project associated with the employment of a successful applicant. Now, of course, those job descriptions cannot be locked in. There's a need, I think, to understand that the job description's got to address immediate concerns you need for the fulfillment of the role. But like any sort of role, jobs change. And of course, the job descriptions we've got in our employment contracts make it quite clear that that's a requirement going forward. So the job description also needs to make it clear that there's a capacity for that role to change when it's operationally needed, and obviously in consultation with the employee. So the employee is able to take the journey in an informative way, consistent with what the business needs in terms of any job change.
Awesome. And in terms of like check-ins and feedback and that sort of thing, I don't think anyone particularly enjoys giving negative feedback or even having, difficult conversations. It is an essential part of being a manager. What advice would you have to managers or employers who are struggling with this?
Well, without dehumanising the person, it is ultimately a situation where a manager needs to think firstly, before they have the conversation with the employee, about the business facts. I mean, you've got to anchor back to the fact that there is a significant amount of money being paid to an individual to perform a job. And if the job isn't being done, you've got to be clear on what aspects of the job are not being effectively done. And once you've got that simply listed, you just got to focus on those facts. That's the essential thing. So it then goes back to pretty much like any business decision related to expenditure. There's an outcome you're expecting, if the outcome is not matching the requirements and isn't paying for the spend, well, you've got an issue. And those facts are the ones that you've really got to raise with the individual. There's also got to be some care in just avoiding the personality, the emotion of the situation, because when you get flustered, you can get a bit emotional in terms of these processes. So I think if you just set the emotion aside, focus on the facts, and then think about how you can simply explain to the employee what's the problem with the work performance. That's the key. So you've got to be able to say what the work performance issue is and why is it causing a problem for the business. You've got to then also be able to advise what needs to be done to fix the problem and when you want the situation fixed by and when there is a review date. So as the employer, you're the boss, you're the adult in the room, and you need to maintain that element of focus and control, just like any other business process. That's essential. And of course, in talking to the employee, and I'm emphasising, you're talking to the employee, not at the employee, it's important to hear what they say back to you, understand what they are saying to you, and then once you get that information, that is an excellent source of information about the problem you've got, and it may well provide some reasonable path to fix the problem. You've got to give that a go, and if that works out, well, you can move on. But if it doesn't, and it gets past that point where informal consultation isn't going to get you the result, well, you've got to go through the formal process. You've got to start documenting what's going on, and that's when things can get scripted. We've got the guidance, and Julian, I'm sure you've been involved in a number of these performance improvement processes where we've had to assist clients through that with a script and a well-planned path forward.
Indeed. All right, let's move right along then. Managing underperformance. So, I suppose we've sort of set the scene for the new employee. Set expectations, been quite clear around the scope of their role. The organisational culture, all the rest. Sometimes there's just difficulties around performance, of course, that just come about for whatever reason. I think the key steps initially really are sort of really identifying what the actual issue is, and sometimes you get caught up between, how do we respond to a conduct issue versus a performance issue, and what's the difference, and what's the appropriate response accordingly. And so really the first step is really identifying what the actual problem is. When we sort of try and distinguish performance from conduct, we're sort of talking about skill versus will, and skill really is the sort of the capacity of someone to perform a role, and whether they're sufficiently skilled to perform the role effectively, versus conduct, which is more of a sort of willfully or deliberately doing something wrong type of issue. So it's really important to really get to the nub of the issue with the employee, and really understand what are the contributors to what is perceived to be an underperformance issue. Is there something that's unclear, or is there some sort of something that's occurred during the induction that we don't know about that has hampered the employee's training? Is there some sort of personality clash within the workplace? It's sort of looking at those sorts of issues. And so I think sort of key things from there are really looking at our informal processes, or informal process approaches initially. I think too often we see, or employers see, that someone's not performing or they're not up to standard, and we just want to, sort of big stick approach, and it's really an effective way. Informal discussions really are key, and for the most part, these usually do address the majority of instances. So yeah, it's really just sort of having those sort of coaching conversations, those day-to-day chats, and again, sort of going back to the previous points that you're making, Robert, around being comfortable to have potentially difficult conversations, because they're really going to go a long way in terms of setting you and the employee up for success, just through coaching and sort of resetting expectations informally, and sort of asking questions and giving strategic advice and support. It really does go a long way. I would say the advice that was always given to me is, it's not coaching unless it's in writing as well. So you're wanting to sort of support these conversations with, detailing something in writing. Assuming that as I mentioned would address most instances of underperformance, but sometimes not. And so that's where we might go to a formal performance improvement plan. So we'll have a look at that in a bit more detail in coming slides. We'll also sort of have a look in a bit more detail around, what happens if there is no improvement. And look, ultimately, these things sort of go one or two ways, provided that the process is run effectively. Either there's sufficient improvement in the employee's performance, or potentially hard decision needs to be made around the employees remaining in that role within the organisation. And so with that comes legal risks. We'll have a look at the sort of main risks around things like unfair dismissal and that sort of thing as well. But yeah, so again, maybe back to you, Robert. I mean, what's the difference between underperformance misconduct from your standpoint, and what are the implications, I suppose, in terms of process?
Well, I think you sort of covered it. I mean, underperformance is the ability to do the job. Conduct is more about behaviour, and it can strike at the essentials of the employment relationship, trust, or just not complying with the company culture, or trust to other team members. Both of these things really are unsatisfactory work conduct, and if it gets serious enough, it's misconduct. But by the process of performance management is much more, I think, easily identifiable because it's factually based. With behaviour matters, you've got to take almost personal preferences out of it. You've got to understand what the behaviour is, and then the behaviour relates back to something concrete. So it's a bit of a two-stepped approach in managing the process. So in fact, from just a business problem point of view, I think managing underperformance is probably an easier process at the end of the day than managing, just bad behaviour.
And looking at those sort of contributors to underperformance, like, have you seen any consistent patterns with the businesses that you've worked with around what the main contributors are?
Yeah. I mean, of late, I think that issue about the position description leading the whole process. So if you got that position description right, and you're advertising that role, many times you get a situation where it's the recruiter who is actually setting the pace and the parameters for a recruitment. And really, to some extent, the critical aspects of the position description are picked up. So again, at that very front end, communication about the requirements of the job at the very start, that they need to be really communicated to all those involved at the start of the process, and of course to the individual. And then when the individual is on board, I think communication again about the requirements of the job, and particularly the needs of the job as things change. That they seem to be the two consistent aspects of underperformance issues related to employment situations. And then finally, Julian, I just think, because it's such a tight labour market, there's the supply's limited, people are desperate to get people on board. I think to some extent there's a bit of a blind eye being turned to the gap between what the individual has and the actual role. And at some stage in the process, if that isn't addressed at the start through bridging the skill gap, it's going to come a cropper. You're going to come to a point where that mismatch of skill with the needs of the job, there's going to be a real point in the process where you're going to have to pause and think. And the pause and think is going to mean you're going to have to change the job to fit the skills of the person there. Just as well, you got a job description which lets you change with consultation. Or secondly, you're just going to make the call and go, look, for the dollars I'm being paid, that person is not right for the job and has got to go. There's no got to go, or there's got to be some alternative decision being made there. So, I mean, they're probably the two most common sorts of factors that are underpinning some of these underperformance issues related to to what our clients are facing recently, Julian.
Yeah, beautiful. Thanks, mate. And look, we've just got on screen now a bit of an overview of a performance improvement plan. And look, really, I think Robert, you'll take us through the specifics of a plan in a bit more detail in the sort of coming slides. But that's a sort of bit of an overview. Is really that sort of taking it back to the basics around identifying the performance issues and considering those potential contributors, and then it's sort of using this as a management tool, I guess, to assist the employee in improving their performance. And so this really comes into play after those informal steps have sort of not done the trick, I suppose. And so as we'll see, like there's a fair amount of consultation that in terms of best practice would go into these sorts of conversations. So really wanting to prepare with specific examples and potential strategies in terms of improvement, but also sort of really engaging the employee with the process as well, and sort of getting their buy-in in terms of what the issues are and how we can work together to address those issues, and agreeing to things like expectations and timelines and the rest. And then it's monitoring and reviewing performance from there. Really is the process. And then we're looking at, well, we've done everything we can. It was reasonable that we can to get some improvement here. Have they hit those benchmarks, yes or no? And of course, there's different responses depending on that outcome. In terms of has the employee just sort of if they gone back to what's expected of them, and if so, then maybe we should just step back from there and they just go on their way, or do we need to sort of go again? Has there been improvement, but potentially not improvement the full way of what's expected, or is there just been no improvement, and really what we're looking at is we're probably not going to get improvement within a reasonable time frame, and then we're sort of having different conversations, and particularly of a disciplinary nature. So yeah, I suppose, Robert, I suppose in terms of sort of two questions, I guess, is when should you commence a performance and improvement process, and I suppose, how important is it to sort of get the employee on board with these sorts of processes?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is, when do you start it? Well, it's not the first thing you do, and it's not the 14th thing you do. It's probably about the fourth thing you do, right? So you've had the talk, you picked something up, you've had the talk, you mentioned it, hasn't worked out, you've got to drill down a little more on the job and find out what's going to happen. Then if on the third time it's not working out, you're letting the person know that the next step is going to be a formal process of getting your performance improvement right. So depends, of course, on the nature of the misperformance as well. It may well be you've got to do it straight away. Just fundamental. If a trade employee does something that costs the business an obscene amount of money, in terms of rework or damage, well, maybe waiting 1, 2, 3 isn't the way to go. You just got to take it on straight away. And I suppose the consultation is important, because if they're not going to travel the journey with you on this process, and that is made clear to you up front that they're not going to cooperate with the performance improvement process, well, you're really pretty much straight into looking at other action you need to take to address the issue. So that element of consultation and engagement is essential, and I've got to say it's preferable. So you don't want to present the performance improvement plan in a light which dissuades engagement. But having said that, it is a very rigorous process, and there's a lot the employee needs to take on board. And again, it's the detail and facts that are important, and those details and facts have to be signed off by the employer.
Yeah, absolutely. Can completely agree. In terms of, they're the ones at the end of the day who's they're going to be the main sort of contributor to the process, along with yourself. So you want to make sure that they're sort of committed and on board as well. What about timeframes? Any sort of particular timeframe?
It all gears back to the business cycle. So I've been in businesses that have run weekly cycles. Fortnightly cycles are less likely. Monthly cycles, perhaps in a sales environment. So for a salesperson, they're reporting their numbers each month. You've noticed they're not hitting the targets. I would say you're checking in weekly, perhaps also fortnightly, and then by the end of that month, as a result of those check-ins, when you have the final discussion at the end of the month, there's no surprise. I think everyone knows what's going on. So you're taking the employee on the journey with you, or they might be taking you on the journey and showing that they are actually improving their performance. So it's pretty much dependent upon the sort of role it is, the way the business reports, and the issue at hand, Julian.
And so I've just got on screen, Robert, if you want to talk to a little bit about performance improvement.
So we have, there you go. That's our template for performance improvement plan, or PIP, as we like to abbreviate it to. And as you can see, there's the insert. There's detail to insert. That's mainly the name of the individual, dates. But as you read that first paragraph, it makes it quite clear that this performance improvement plan is being entered into because of a problem with work, which has led into a disciplinary process that was concluded on a specific date. And as a consequence of those discussions, both the employer and employee have agreed within a certain time frame, so the dates are included in there, that the performance will be reviewed, and there'll be a conclusion to that. Also notes that days in which check-in meetings or catch-ups are organised, that might be weekly or fortnightly. I've got monthly there, obviously, at the end. And then the individual's got to sign off on it. They've got to sign off to say they understand what the PIP is about, what will happen in that there could be further disciplinary action, which could include termination of employment. And obviously, they've been advised that if they need some independent advice, they should go and get it. And of course, then the employee signs off on that.
Beautiful.
And as you can see, the document itself is pretty straightforward. Now, I've just randomly picked a couple of issues that have related to targets of completing scheduled work, or ensuring error rates are reduced and eliminated. And as you can see, you've got the performance expectation objective target is led off with, hey, here's your level of performance.
Yeah.
That's unsatisfactory. But what we're going to need to do is get you up to either a target, it might be 0, or it might be, might be our way, it might be 80%, 90% of whatever's going on.
So,
and right next to sorry, Julian, I was going to say.
I was going to say, so you're really clearly stating what the current state of affairs are and where we want them to be.
Correct. Now, you've got a comments column there. So obviously, when there's a target date as well, and a column there indicating whether the target has been met or not. And then you've got a manager and assessor that is going to make some decision and outcome sort of based conclusion about the plan. The comments there, obviously, it gives an opportunity for the employee to make some comments, but also the manager. So though that column's somewhat compressed for the purposes of this webinar, it actually needs to be probably the widest of the columns there to help you out. And then finally, well, there you go. There's some additional issues related to that. But finally, I think the key thing is understanding the process as you as a manager, because you really want the employee to not only know that they've got to meet these targets, but you're going to support them to meet these targets, which means you're all over it. So you're going to be talking to the person weekly. You're going to be helping them devise and implement action plans if you're on a 1-month basis, so they can implement it at the end of week 1, say. You're going to help them deal with a range of processes there. Now, these are matters that have been related to recent performance improvement matters that we've dealt with. So you can see in one instance there's an escalation process, there's efficiency targets, there's also a whole bunch of support related to helping a salesperson through the process. But the idea is you as the manager need to be right there walking with the individual, taking them through that, because at the end of the day, you're going to be in a position where you're either going to be able to have to tick the box, which means you got to know the facts. And as you and your friend have been working closely together over the month, you're not going to be surprised. And as I said, there is the individual. Also, there's discretion in there to discontinue, the performance improvement program if the targets are hit, and equally flip it back if there's a problem down the track. Yeah.
Cool. No, that's great, mate. That's great. Thanks for taking us through that. And I suppose sort of the next sort of slide is, it's sort of, we don't sort of undertake these processes, for the fun of it, or whatever. I mean, it's absolutely great organizational practice to make sure that we're, completing such processes and really being there for our employees to aid their development and support and that sort of thing. There are also risks attached to managing poor performance and conduct issues. I think the main one in Australia is the risk around unfair dismissal, and so really, we've included up there, a bit around the criteria for assessing harshness or unjust or unreasonable, or effectively unfair dismissals under the Fair Work Act. And what we're looking at there is, is there a valid reason for the termination? And that's usually down to capacity or performance, as we mentioned, or conduct. And so, clearly performance is a potential valid reason for termination. But I suppose it doesn't end there. We're also looking at things such as, have we advised the employee of the reason for the termination? Prior written warnings if the dismissal is related to unsatisfactory performance, and of course there's procedural things attached to that. But really, what we're looking at is overall, sure, there's a potential valid reason if someone's not performing for their role, but there's also other obligations around, advising the employee of their unsatisfactory performance, giving them a reasonable time frame to improve their performance and an opportunity to improve, and also making them clear around what the potential consequences are if there's no improvement. And so that's what this PIP process is, I suppose, from that standpoint, is really having those protections in place so that we're sort of achieving all of those things and documenting them really clearly for both the employee's benefit and the employer's benefit as well. But yeah, so in terms of, I suppose, unfair dismissal, Robert, potential consequences, is it a big deal? Is it something to be concerned about?
It's just a distraction from your valuable management time is the real issue there. There's also the cost. There's just legal costs associated with the thing. And if you've got it wrong, your process is wanting, there's potentially, could be significant cost there as well if you got an unfair dismissal claim.
Okay, cool. All right, performance reviews. I think this is over to you now.
I was going to say now, one way you can avoid the performance improvement plans and also the unfair dismissal situations is have a performance review process. And the beauty of the performance review process, and again, we have templates that help you out with that. It keeps people focused on the individual performance. That is not only going to help the business, but help them develop. And if they're developing really well, it's going to help them retain an interest in working for your business. Just that transparency and communication of what is needed to be done on a day-to-day basis and how that effort, that specific effort, irrespective of how mundane it may seem on the job, actually helps the business, the operation, and more particularly the consequences of not getting it right. That understanding for the individual is so helpful, and it's something that is picked up in your performance review process. So you're invariably looking at issues that help the person develop in the role. So that may mean require additional training. It may mean new skills. But again, this is a process where you're picking up not a great deal, not a great number of issues, but certainly one or two key areas of improvement that helps the person, your employee, not only do the job they're currently doing, but develop their skills more competently to help and assist the business going forward. And as I said, it's more of a positive spin than the performance improvement program. And Julian, you would be aware there are many reasons why this should do a performance review, but what do you think are the most important reasons from your dealings with the client base for SMEs to do this?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'd say it's probably become one of those things. There's a bit of stigma attached to performance reviews, and I think rightly so. There's sort of these big corporate or government administrative processes that HR make managers do, and no one really enjoys them, and they happen once a year, and it becomes this big thing, and no one really remembers what was discussed the previous year or what was agreed or what should have been achieved, and no one really knows what to get out of it. So I think we've sort of been using them not in the best way, I suppose. But yeah, I think particularly at the moment, sort of tight labour market, as you mentioned as well, Robert, is sort of, I think all of these things we've got on screen here are all important. In terms of keeping employees focused. What are the big goals? What are the big rocks? What are the things that the company wants to achieve and the employee wants to achieve over, the specified period of time? And it's sort of aligning those two interests, right? So, the business might be sort of heading in a particular direction, and it's sort of having the employee on board for that ride and making sure that, we're sort of heading in this direction. this is going to require a bit of change, maybe a bit of reskilling or something like that. We think it's a really good opportunity for you to be part of that and sort of working towards that as well on an individual level. Let's put together some goals along those lines. And with that is that sort of, the employee feeling like there's a career path and career development, something that they're engaged with and brought into, and it becomes that real retention tool accordingly, because they're on board with the company and the goals and the individual goals and that sort of thing. There's a lot to be said about transparency and communication as well, and using it as an opportunity to really being upfront and clear around what's going on and what's expected. It's also a really good way to develop and utilize the skills of the employee. If they've got a particular interest or a particular focus or something they've been studying as well, it's a really good opportunity to look towards putting in place goals around utilizing those skills, and of course rewarding success. It's always a great opportunity to reward success.
Yeah. Look, I'm just mindful of the time, mate. So
yeah.
I might flip to the next slide if I could.
Yeah, mate.
And just, I think we just need to emphasise that, MyHR knows that the best practice for performance reviews also includes thinking about not just the now, but probably in 2-year blocks, what's going to happen in the next 2 years, the 2 years after that. And that way, when you're doing these performance reviews, which could be, quarterly, half yearly, once a year, depending on what your system is, what your preference is, you're able to have that overall business plan also linked to the individual involved. Communication of your business plan when you're talking about their performance reviews and why it's important. So if your business is getting into a new bit of technology, obviously there is specific bits of machinery that may need to be understood and utilised, and there's training about that. And that introduction of that technology down the track may require an individual to do some other training so they can get ticketed to operate this machine, which may be 12 months in advance. So in the interim, you might have some interim planning there. So again, that communication of the specifics of the strategic plan and the individual responsibility of how that fits into the go forward of the business are pretty key and critical. If that is understood, you're then able to resource the whole situation appropriately going forward. So that performance review actually adds some value, not only to the individual, but to the go forward of the individual. Now, when you do set the performance review task, there's a lot of debate about how frequently you should check in to see how things are going once the plan is set, particularly if it's an annual plan. Julian, have you got any views about what's the best way to check in and see how things are going forward?
Yeah, so I think, there's no real one-size-fits-all approach to this sort of stuff. And I think that's why some people are quite skeptical of performance reviews, because I think in the past there just has been this annual thing that has been quite rigid. And so, we think that in terms of employers running performance reviews, for most of our clients, they probably do an annual performance goal setting period. And then you're sort of wanting to have regular check-ins, like on a quarterly basis or potentially even a monthly basis, specifically dedicated to that performance review discussion from there. But I think the key things is not to get too caught up with how frequently or what sort of, I guess we're looking to remove the administrative burdens and really give employers and managers, remove those things to make it easy so they can just think about those things, such as what's on the horizon, how are we going to respond, how are we communicating with our employees, what skills do we need to develop in our workforce, because those are like the key things that these performance review conversations, it's around, the business needs around skilling workforces and development of the workforce. Great opportunity to align goals and employees' needs around opportunities for development and career progression and that sort of thing. And so that's where it becomes a really good retention tool around building engagement and communication, alignment of goals, and fostering company culture. That's where we're really big on our technology platform, really having the flexibility to be adaptable for different organizations to really fit in with particular corporate jargon that they might use or particular timeframes that they might use, particular language. We also have like a library of types of goals that might be relevant for particular jobs and that sort of thing. So it's really, and in addition to that, we sort of removing the paperwork and having it there in the technology and viewable for both the manager and the employee. Having the sort of reminders available to both the employer and the employee, so they know it's coming up. It sort of just makes it an easier process and a more enjoyable process along with that. So I think the key things are, and just sort of summing up before we sort of move into questions, although we're sort of running out of time, is keep it simple and focused. Make it a conversation. If we're setting goals and that sort of thing, we want to, again, that engagement and bringing the employee on side and having the conversation around, what are they actually wanting to work towards? Are they even aware of where we're working? And sort of having that discussion. Of course, being responsible to individuals is really important in terms of, how do they want to go about achieving these sorts of goals, and responsive to roles, of course, as well. The regular check-ins is critical, rather than having that annual performance review and then it goes under a bunch of paperwork on your desk or in the back of your email list and not thought about for another 12 months. The check-ins is the critical part. So you've got that follow through and demonstration of the employee of the commitment that goes with that. And I also think it's expecting employees to succeed as well. So going in a positive way, really proactive way is really important. But yeah, making it easy, I think, is the key thing. And that's where I think the technology is where it's at the moment, whereby you can do this stuff in a lot better, a lot easier way than you could in the past when you're just given a whole bunch of paperwork. You had to sit down at a particular time organised by HR or whatever. Now it's sort of the technology really drives the thing, and it really allows you to have a really good user experience, both from the manager and the employee standpoint. So that's where we're big on making these sorts of things easy for our clients. So yeah, so we've just got an example just on the screen around what we're looking at there in terms of, the sorts of what employees and employers see when they use our platform around, around performance reviews. And it really just keeps it as simple as some key objectives, some key values that we want to focus on, or soft skills or whatever it might be. And then the performance development plan, which is effectively where the rubber hits the road. What is the employee going to be doing, or how am I going to help the employee achieve these objectives or develop these particular skills or values that we want them to develop, and building engagement and agreement are in that, having it there and accessible in the platform for both parties, documenting our check-ins so it's clearly there in the one place. So we've front of mind when we log into the app, we can see it there. It's available for everyone to see, or the relevant parties to see. So yeah, so look, that sort of brings us to the conclusion of our session today. Look, I note that we haven't as yet received any questions or anything from any of the participants. So I suppose now is just a reminder, if anyone's got any questions, we're available for the next few minutes to field any questions anyone has. So we might just hold out to see if anything is forthcoming, but it's looking like we've probably addressed everything that people want to hear today, Robert, or they're sick and tired of hearing us.
Yeah, no, so I think we've been exhaustive on this.
So all right. Well, in that case, thank you everyone for tuning in. As I mentioned, if The recording will be available to on the MyHR website. We really appreciate everyone for tuning in to learn about performance, employee performance, and how we can assist. And if anyone has any queries about MyHR or anything, they can reach out to us and learn a little bit more.
Okay, that sounds great. Awesome, Julian. Thanks very much for organising it.
All right,
Cheers, mate.
thanks, guys.
See you next time.